The rain came down in heavy, relentless sheets, turning the streets of Chicago's South Side into a blur of flickering lights and smeared reflections. The kind of rain that didn't just fall, it pressed down, soaked through, settled into your bones, and made everything feel heavier than it already was. And inside, a narrow diner, wedged between a laundromat and a boarded-up convenience store, Maya Brooks wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that night. Her shoulders aching from a 12-hour shift, her sneakers damp, her patience worn thin but not gone, never gone, because no matter how tired she got, she had learned a long time ago that the world didn't get kinder just because you were exhausted. So if there was going to be any kindness at all, someone had to choose it, again and again, even on nights like this. The clock above the register blinked 11:17 p.m. The neon "open" sign in the window buzzing faintly as if it too was struggling to stay awake. And Maya reached for her rag again, ready to finish up, to close early if she could, to go home to her small apartment where the radiator clanked louder than it heated, where tomorrow's worries would be waiting, just as patiently as tonight's. But then she saw it, just beyond the glass, just outside the reach of the diner's weak yellow light, a shape that didn't belong, small, still, and unmistakably human. She paused, just for a second, her hand hovering mid-air, her first instinct telling her to ignore it, to finish her shift, to mind her own business the way the world had taught her to. Because stepping outside your lane, especially in a place like this, especially looking like her, never came without consequences. But then the lightning cracked somewhere in the distance, illuminating the street in a harsh, fleeting flash. And for that brief moment, she saw him clearly. A boy, maybe 10, maybe younger, sitting in a battered wheelchair, his thin frame hunched forward, his jacket too light for the weather, his hands gripping a worn blanket that did nothing to keep out the cold. Maya exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening as she looked away, just for a second, trying to convince herself that someone else would come, that he wasn't alone, that there was a parent nearby, that there had to be a reason. But the street stayed empty. The rain kept falling, and when she looked back, he hadn't moved, hadn't even shifted, just sat there like he had nowhere else to be and no one else coming. Damn, she muttered under her breath, already knowing she had lost the argument with herself. She grabbed a spare towel from behind the counter and pushed open the diner door, the cold hitting her immediately, sharp and unforgiving, the wind biting through her thin uniform as she stepped into the rain, her eyes locking onto the boy as she approached slowly, not wanting to startle him, not wanting to make him feel like he had done something wrong just by being there. "Hey, hey, sweetheart," she called gently, crouching down in front of him, her voice softer now, warmer, like the tone she didn't even realize she saved for moments like this. "What are you doing out here all by yourself?" The boy flinched, just slightly, his fingers tightening around the blanket before he looked up, his eyes wide, uncertain, a little too tired for someone his age, and for a moment he didn't answer, like he was weighing whether or not it was safe to speak. And that hesitation, that tiny pause, told Maya more than any words could. I'm waiting for my don't." His voice barely audible over the rain. Maya glanced up and down the street, scanning for any sign of movement, any car slowing down, any figure running toward them. But there was nothing, just the distant hum of traffic and the steady rhythm of water hitting pavement. "Yeah," she said, turning her attention back to him, her brows knitting together slightly. "He say how long he'd be?" The boy shook his head, pulling the blanket tighter around himself, his shoulders rising as if he could shrink away from the cold. Maya hesitated again, just for a moment, her mind running through every warning she had ever been given, every story of people stepping in where they shouldn't, every consequence that seemed to fall harder on people who looked like her, who asked too many questions, who got too involved. But then she looked at him, really looked at him, at the way his lips trembled, at the way his hands shook despite how tightly he held on, and something in her chest refused to let her walk back inside. "Well," she said, forcing a small, reassuring smile, "you can't wait out here in this mess. Not tonight. Come on, let's get you somewhere warm, okay?" He didn't answer right away, his eyes searching her face, cautious, uncertain. But there was something else there too, something like hope, small and fragile, but still alive, and after a second, he gave a slow, hesitant nod. "Okay," he whispered. Maya let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, and moved behind the wheelchair, her hands steady as she gripped the handles, guiding him carefully through the rain and back into the diner, the warmth hitting them almost immediately, wrapping around them like a shield against the storm outside. "There we go," she murmured, wheeling him over to a booth near the radiator, grabbing the towel and gently draping it over his shoulders. "That better?" He nodded again, a little quicker this time, his fingers loosening slightly around the blanket as the heat began to seep back into him. "I'm Maya," she said, crouching down so she was at eye level with him, offering a small smile. "What's your name?" "Ethan," he replied, his voice still quiet, but steadier now. "Ethan," she repeated, nodding. "That's a strong name. I like that." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "You hungry?" He hesitated just for a second, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be, and that alone made something twist in her chest. "Yeah," he admitted softly. "All right then," Maya said, standing up, already moving toward the kitchen. "We're gonna fix that." As she worked, slicing bread, heating up soup, moving with the practiced rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, her mind drifted just briefly to nights from her own childhood, nights where a warm meal wasn't guaranteed, where kindness came in small, unexpected moments that stayed with you longer than anything else. And when she brought the plate back, setting it down carefully in front of him, she didn't make a big deal out of it, didn't turn it into something it wasn't. "This one's on me," she said simply, sliding a napkin toward him. Ethan's eyes widened as he took his first bite, the tension in his face melting just a little, just enough to remind her that underneath the fear and the cold, he was still just a kid. "This is really good," he said, almost like he couldn't believe it. Maya chuckled softly, leaning back against the booth, watching him eat. "Best grilled cheese in the city," she said lightly, though there was something quieter behind her words, something more personal. What she didn't see, what she couldn't see from inside the warm glow of the diner, was the black SUV parked across the street, its engine idling low, its tinted windows reflecting the neon sign, and inside, Victor Cole sat in silence, his sharp gaze fixed on the scene unfolding before him, his jaw tight, his fingers resting against the steering wheel as he watched his son laugh, really laugh, for the first time that night. He hadn't meant for this to happen. The delay, the call that ran longer than expected, the decision to have Ethan wait just a few minutes that turned into something else entirely, something he couldn't control. And Victor Cole was not a man who tolerated things he couldn't control, but as he watched that woman, that stranger, kneel beside his son, speak to him like he mattered, like he wasn't an inconvenience, something unfamiliar settled in his chest, something he didn't have a name for and didn't particularly like. He reached for his phone anyway, dialing quickly, his voice low when the line connected. "Claire, I need you to go to a diner on 47th. No business attire, keep it casual, and don't draw attention." He paused, his eyes never leaving the window. "And Claire, find out who she is." Across the street, the rain kept falling, the city kept moving, and inside the diner, Maya handed Ethan a chocolate chip cookie wrapped in wax paper just as the door swung open again. A rush of cold air spilling in ahead of a woman in a hoodie and jeans, her movements controlled, her eyes scanning the room in a way that didn't match the casual way she was dressed. Her gaze landed on Ethan immediately, and just as quickly her expression softened, too smoothly, too perfectly. "Hey there, champ," she said, crouching beside him, her voice light, rehearsed. "Time to head out." Ethan looked up at her, then back at Maya, hesitation flickering across his face, small but unmistakable. Maya straightened slowly, her instincts sharpening, her eyes narrowing just slightly as she folded her arms. "You know him?" she asked, her tone calm but firm. The woman smiled, quick and easy. "I'm his aunt," she said. Maya didn't respond right away, her gaze shifting to Ethan, her voice softer now, but carrying weight. "That true, baby?" Ethan hesitated, just long enough for the silence to stretch. The woman's smile tightened, barely noticeable, but Maya saw it. I think so," Ethan said quietly. Something in Maya's chest pulled tight, her instincts screaming at her to push further, to ask more, to make sure, but she also knew the line she was walking, knew how quickly things could turn, knew how easily she could be painted as the problem instead of the protector. And for a moment, just a moment, she stood there, weighing it all. Then she reached for the counter, grabbed the cookie, and placed it gently in Ethan's hands. "For the road," she said, her voice steady, even as her eyes searched his one last time. He smiled, small but real. "Thank you, Miss Maya." She nodded, forcing a smile of her own as she watched them head toward the door, the unease settling deeper in her chest as the woman glanced back at her, just once, a look that said more than words ever could. Outside, the SUV's headlights flickered on, the rain swallowing them almost instantly as the door opened and Ethan was lifted inside, and Victor Cole stepped out just long enough to catch a glimpse of the woman standing in the diner doorway, her silhouette framed by warm light, her expression unreadable. And in that moment, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. That night, whether she realized it or not, Maya Brooks had just stepped into his world, and nothing about her life was going to stay the same. The next morning didn't feel any different at first, and that was the strangest part of it, because Maya Brooks had learned to measure change in small, practical ways, in the sound of her alarm clock going off too early, in the stubborn chill that clung to her apartment walls, in the way the coffee tasted just a little too bitter when she couldn't afford the good kind. And when she woke up that day, the world hadn't shifted. The ceiling above her was still cracked in the same place, the radiator still knocked like it had something to prove, and the weight of rent, bills, and everything in between still sat heavy on her chest, just like always. But somewhere beneath all of that, quieter but persistent, was the memory of a boy in the rain and the look he had given her when he said thank you. And she tried, she really did, to push it aside, to file it away as just another night, just another moment that didn't belong to her anymore. But something about it lingered. She moved through her morning routine with the same steady rhythm, pulling on her uniform, tying her hair back, grabbing her bag. The motions automatic, practiced. But when she stepped out into the hallway and locked her door behind her, she hesitated. Just for a second, her hand resting against the peeling paint, her mind replaying that moment, that hesitation in Ethan's voice, that look from the woman who had claimed to be his aunt, and the way it hadn't quite added up. Not cleanly, not comfortably, and Maya had spent most of her life learning when to trust her instincts and when to silence them, and she didn't like that she still didn't know which one this was. By the time she reached the diner, the sky had cleared, the streets still damp but alive again, with the usual noise, and for a while, everything fell back into place. Orders called out, coffee poured, plates stacked and cleared, the rhythm of the job taking over, the way it always did until it didn't, until the bell above the diner door rang in a way that made her look up, not because it sounded different, but because something in her chest told her it was. He didn't belong there, not in the way he stood, not in the way he carried himself, not in the way the room seemed to shift ever so slightly around him, as if even the air understood that he came from somewhere else entirely. And when Victor Cole stepped inside, dressed in a dark coat that probably cost more than everything in the diner combined, his presence didn't announce itself loudly. It didn't need to. It simply settled, controlled, deliberate, like a man used to walking into places and owning them without ever raising his voice. Maya didn't move right away, her grip tightening slightly around the coffee pot in her hand as she watched him approach, her mind already working, already connecting pieces. The car, the woman, the boy. And when he stopped just a few feet from the counter, his grey eyes meeting hers with a calm intensity that didn't quite feel like curiosity and didn't quite feel like judgment, she set the pot down slowly, wiping her hands on her apron more out of habit than necessity. "We're not open for," she started, but he cut her off, not rudely, not sharply, just directly. "You helped my son last night." The words landed between them, heavy and precise, and for a moment Maya didn't respond, her gaze sharpening as she studied him more closely now, the way his coat still carried the faint crease of long wear, the slight tension in his jaw, the exhaustion he was trying to hide beneath control, and something in her chest tightened. Not with fear, not exactly, but with recognition, because she knew men like this, not personally, but from a distance. Men who moved through the world with power that didn't need to be explained. "Ethan," she said slowly, more statement than question. Victor nodded once. Silence stretched for a second, then two, and Maya folded her arms, leaning slightly against the counter, her posture shifting into something more guarded, more grounded. "So what?" she said, her tone steady but edged. "You came here to tell me I overstepped, that I shouldn't have gotten involved?" Victor's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered, something that almost looked like surprise, as if that wasn't the reaction he had expected. "No," he said after a moment, his voice even, controlled. "I came because I don't believe in things like that." Maya raised an eyebrow. "In what exactly?" "In people doing something for nothing," he replied, just as calmly. There it was, laid out clean and simple, the kind of belief that didn't bend easily, and Maya let out a quiet breath through her nose, shaking her head slightly as she pushed off the counter. "Well, that sounds like a you problem," she said, not unkindly, but not backing down either, "because I didn't do it for you, or your money, or whatever you think this is. I did it because your kid was cold and alone, and that's reason enough." Victor studied her, really studied her this time, like he was trying to fit her into a framework that didn't quite exist, and for the first time since he had walked in, there was the faintest shift in his posture, something less rigid, less certain. "I was delayed," he said, not as an excuse, but as a fact. "I told him to wait a few minutes. It turned into longer than that." Maya didn't soften, but she didn't press either. just nodded once, acknowledging the explanation without accepting it fully. "Yeah," she said. "That happens." Another pause, heavier this time, and then Victor reached into his coat, pulling out a small envelope, placing it carefully on the counter between them, not sliding it toward her, not pushing it, just setting it there like it spoke for itself. Maya looked down at it, then back up at him, her expression hardening. "No," she said immediately. "You don't even know what it is," Victor replied. "I don't need to," she shot back, her voice firm now. "I'm not taking money for helping a kid." "It's not a payment," he said, just as steady. "It's an offer." That made her pause, just for a fraction of a second, not enough to break her stance, but enough to shift it. "What kind of offer?" "A job," Victor said, watching her closely now. "A 3-month contract to start, consulting on public relations and community outreach." Maya blinked once, then let out a short, disbelieving laugh, stepping back slightly as if to create space between them and whatever this was. "You're serious," she said, shaking her head. "You walked into a diner, saw a waitress help your kid, and decided she should come work for you." "I decided," Victor corrected calmly, "that you saw something most people overlook." Maya crossed her arms tighter, her jaw setting. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," he replied, not raising his voice, not pushing, just stating it like it was already settled. "I know you acted without knowing who he was. I know you questioned someone who didn't add up. And I know you didn't back down, even when it would have been easier to." That hit closer than she expected, and she didn't like it. "You did your homework," she said quietly. Victor didn't deny it. Silence stretched again, thicker now, heavier, and Maya glanced at the envelope once more, her mind already racing despite herself. 3 months, consulting, public relations, words that felt distant, almost unreal compared to the life she was standing in. But then reality crept back in just as quickly. Rent due in 2 weeks, the manager cutting hours last month, the constant balancing act of making just enough to get by, but never enough to get ahead. "You think I can just walk into your world and do that job?" she said finally, her voice quieter now, but no less firm. "I think," Victor said, meeting her gaze, "that you already do, just in a different setting." Maya let out a breath, long and slow, her eyes dropping to the counter for a moment as her mother's voice echoed in the back of her mind, clear as if she was standing right there. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you owe them for doing the right thing, baby. They'll dress it up like opportunity, but it always comes with a price." And Maya had carried that with her for years, through every job, every choice, every moment where someone tried to turn her value into something they could own. "What's the catch?" she asked, looking back up. "No catch," Victor said. She almost laughed again. "There's always a catch." He considered that for a moment, then nodded slightly. "You'll be evaluated," he said. "If it doesn't work, the contract ends. No obligation beyond that." That was more honest than she expected, and somehow that made it harder, not easier. "And if it does work, then we discuss something longer term." Maya stared at him, searching for something, a crack, a hint of manipulation, anything that would make this easier to dismiss. But he didn't give her one. He just stood there, steady, controlled, waiting. "You don't even know if I want this," she said. "I don't," he admitted, "but I think you should have the option." That, more than anything else, made her hesitate. Not the money, not the title, not the idea of stepping into a world that had never made space for her, but the simple fact that he wasn't forcing it, wasn't dressing it up, wasn't pretending it was anything other than what it was. An opportunity, complicated, uncertain, but real. Maya reached out slowly, her fingers brushing against the envelope before she pulled it toward her, not opening it yet, just holding it, feeling the weight of it, not just the paper, but everything it represented. "I'm not your charity case," she said, her voice low but steady. Victor's gaze didn't waver. "I know. I don't owe you anything." "You don't?" She held his eyes for another second, then nodded once. "I'll think about it," she said. Victor gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in return. "That's all I'm asking." And then, just like that, he turned and walked out, the bell above the door ringing softly as it closed behind him, leaving Maya standing there with the envelope in her hands, the diner suddenly feeling smaller, quieter, like something had shifted even if nothing around her had changed. She stood there for a long moment, her thoughts moving faster than she could keep up with. Her heart somewhere between caution and possibility, between everything she had been taught to protect and everything she had never allowed herself to imagine. And when she finally slipped the envelope into her bag, it wasn't a decision, not yet, but it wasn't nothing either. And deep down, in a place she didn't quite want to acknowledge, she already knew one thing. She wasn't going to ignore it. 3 days later, Maya Brooks stood across the street from a glass tower that seemed to rise too cleanly, too sharply out of the Chicago skyline, its polished surface reflecting a version of the city she barely recognized, one without cracked sidewalks or flickering lights, one without the quiet weight of people trying to get by. And for a moment, she just stood there, her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her bag, her reflection faintly staring back at her in the building's mirrored exterior, looking smaller than she felt, and somehow more exposed than she wanted to admit. She had almost said no, more than once, the envelope sitting on her kitchen table for 2 full nights before she finally opened it, reading the offer over and over like the words might rearrange themselves into something less complicated, something easier to refuse, but they hadn't. And in the end, it hadn't been the money that changed her mind. Not really. It had been the possibility, the quiet, dangerous thought that maybe, just maybe, she could step into a room that had never been built for her and not just survive it, but reshape it, even if she didn't fully believe that yet. The revolving doors slid open as she stepped inside, the shift immediate and unmistakable, the air cooler, cleaner, quieter, in a way that didn't feel natural. The kind of quiet that came from control rather than calm. And almost instantly, she felt it, the subtle change in attention. The way heads turned just a fraction too long. The way eyes lingered just enough to register difference before looking away again, not openly hostile, not overtly rude, but measuring, assessing, categorizing, and Maya had spent her whole life recognizing that look, the kind that asked a question without ever saying it out loud. "What are you doing here?" She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin slightly as she approached the front desk, her steps steady even if her pulse wasn't. "I'm here to see Victor Cole," she said, her voice calm, controlled. The receptionist glanced at her, then at the screen, her expression polite but distant. "Name?" "Maya Brooks." There was a pause, brief but noticeable. The kind that said the name didn't match the expectation. But then the receptionist nodded. "He's expecting you, 32nd floor." Maya thanked her, stepping toward the elevator bank, the polished marble beneath her feet, reflecting the movement above it. Everything in this place, designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind you exactly where you stood in the hierarchy. And as the elevator doors closed behind her, she caught her reflection again, this time clearer, sharper, her blazer secondhand but pressed, her heels worn but steady, and for a second, she let herself see what they might see. Not polished enough, not refined enough, not one of them. And then she exhaled, slow and deliberate, shaking it off, before it could take root. The doors opened onto the 32nd floor with a soft chime, revealing a space that was even more controlled than the lobby below. Glass walls, sleek desks, quiet conversations that stopped just a beat too long as she walked past. And at the far end of the corridor, a figure stepped forward, familiar in a way that immediately tightened something in her chest. Claire. She was dressed differently now. Sharp lines, tailored suit, her blonde hair pulled back with precision. But the posture was the same, the eyes just as observant, just as calculating. And when she stopped in front of Maya, there was no smile this time, just a measured look that took everything in without apology. "Ms. Brooks," Claire said smoothly, her tone neutral but edged with something unreadable. "I wasn't sure you'd accept." Maya tilted her head slightly, her own gaze steady. "Yeah, well, I wasn't sure either." A flicker of something crossed Claire's expression, gone almost as quickly as it appeared, before she gestured down the hallway. "Mr. Cole is waiting." Maya followed, her steps matching Claire's pace, neither rushing nor lagging behind, the silence between them thick but not empty. And as they reached a set of glass doors that opened into a large office, Claire stepped aside, letting Maya enter first. Victor Cole stood by the window, the city stretching out behind him in sharp lines and distant motion, and when he turned, his expression didn't show surprise, only a quiet acknowledgement, as if this had always been the outcome he expected. "You're on time," he said. Maya raised an eyebrow, stepping further into the room. "You sound surprised." "I'm not," he replied, "but I don't assume." She nodded once, taking space around her, the clean desk, the absence of clutter, the way everything felt intentional, controlled, and for a moment, she wondered what it would take to exist in a world like this without constantly bracing for impact. "So," she said, crossing her arms slightly, 3 months, right?" Victor inclined his head. "Trial period, yes." "And what exactly am I supposed to be doing here?" she asked. "Because I've never worked in a place like this." "That's precisely why you're here," he said, moving toward his desk, picking up a file and sliding it across to her. "I don't need someone who already thinks like everyone else in this building." Maya glanced down at the file, flipping it open, scanning quickly, her brow furrowing as the details came into focus. "Outsourcing," she said, looking back up. "You're planning to move production overseas." "We're evaluating it," Victor corrected. "And that means layoffs," she said flatly. "It means restructuring," he replied, just as evenly. Maya let out a quiet breath, shaking her head slightly. "You can dress it up however you want, but it's the same thing." Victor didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on her, measuring, waiting. "That's your first assignment," he said finally. "There's a meeting at noon with Orion Group. They're pushing for the transition. I want your perspective before we walk in." Maya blinked, caught off guard for the first time since she arrived. "You want my perspective?" she repeated. "I've been here 5 minutes." "And in those 5 minutes," Victor said, "you've already identified the core issue more directly than most of my senior staff." She didn't know whether to be annoyed or impressed by that, so she settled somewhere in between, flipping through the file again, her eyes moving faster now, connecting pieces, patterns, consequences. "You've already run the numbers," she said. "You know what this does to the communities you're pulling out of." Victor's expression didn't change, but his silence was answer enough. Maya closed the file, setting it down with a soft but deliberate motion. "And you still want to move forward?" I want to understand all angles before making a final decision, he replied. She studied him for a moment, longer this time, searching for something beneath the surface, something that explained why he would bring her in for this, why he would trust her voice in a room that didn't even know her name yet. You don't trust them, she said quietly. Victor's gaze sharpened slightly. My senior staff, he said, understand the numbers. And you think they don't understand the people, Maya finished. He didn't deny it. Before she could respond, the door opened again, and Claire stepped back in, a tablet in her hand, her expression composed, but her eyes flicking briefly toward Maya, something unreadable passing between them. The Orion group has arrived, she said. Victor nodded once, turning his attention back to Maya. You'll be in the meeting. Maya stared at him for a second, disbelief creeping in again. You're serious? Yes. She let out a short breath, half laugh, half disbelief. You're throwing me into a room full of executives on my first day. I'm giving you an opportunity to prove you belong there, he corrected. Maya held his gaze, something in her chest tightening. Not with fear, not exactly, but with the weight of what this moment meant. The line she was about to cross, the space she was about to step into, and for a second she thought about walking away, about leaving this building and going back to something simpler, something known. But then she thought about the file in her hand, about the people who wouldn't be in that room, whose voices wouldn't be heard unless someone chose to bring them in. All right, she said finally, her voice steady, grounded. Let's see what they've got. The conference room was colder than the rest of the building. The kind of cold that wasn't about temperature, but about atmosphere, steel and glass, and polished wood. A space designed to strip away anything unnecessary, including comfort. And as Maya stepped inside beside Victor, she felt it immediately. The shift in attention, sharper this time, less subtle. The eyes that turned toward her not with curiosity now, but with open evaluation. The silent question louder than before. Who let her in here? 3 men sat across the table, their suits immaculate, their posture relaxed in a way that only came from years of being in control. And the one in the center, Philip Langford, didn't even try to hide the way his gaze skimmed over Maya before settling back on Victor, dismissive in a way that felt almost practiced. Victor, he said smoothly, I didn't realize we were bringing guests. Maya felt the edge in that word. Guest, like she was temporary, incidental, not meant to be taken seriously, and for a moment she said nothing, letting the silence sit, letting it stretch just enough to be noticed. She's not a guest, Victor said, his tone even but firm. She's part of this discussion. Langford's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Is that so? Maya leaned back slightly in her chair, her posture relaxed, but deliberate, her eyes locking onto his without hesitation. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, controlled, but carried weight. Depends, she said, tilting her head just a fraction. Are we here to talk about numbers? Or are we here to talk about what those numbers actually mean? For the first time, Langford's attention shifted fully to her, not dismissing now, but assessing, recalibrating. And across the table, Victor didn't interrupt, didn't step in. He just watched, the smallest shift in his expression suggesting that this, right here, was exactly what he had brought her in for. And just like that, the dynamic in the room began to change. The shift didn't happen all at once, and that was what made it dangerous, because for a while, just long enough to let her guard down, things seemed to be working. Not perfectly, not easily, but steadily. And Maya Brooks learned how to move through Coltech the same way she had learned to move through every other space that wasn't built with her in mind, by watching, by listening, by choosing her words carefully, and then, when it mattered, not softening them at all. And over the next few weeks, she found her rhythm, sitting in meetings where she wasn't expected to speak and, speaking anyway, challenging ideas that had been accepted for years without question, forcing people like his at Langford to reconsider decisions they had already convinced themselves were inevitable. And for the first time since she stepped into that building, the looks she received began to change, not completely, not universally, but enough to notice, enough to shift from dismissal to something closer to respect, or at the very least, caution. Victor Cole didn't say much about it. Not directly, but he watched, always watching, the same way he had that night across the street, measuring outcomes, recalibrating expectations, and if there were moments where he seemed less certain, less rigid in his thinking, he didn't acknowledge them. But Maya saw it anyway, in the way he paused just a fraction longer before making a decision, in the way he started asking questions instead of issuing directives, and that alone told her that something was changing, not just for her, but within the system itself. Claire, on the other hand, remained an uncertainty, her presence constant, controlled, her professionalism never slipping. But the tension between them hadn't disappeared. It had simply evolved, sharpened into something quieter, more complex, because Claire wasn't openly hostile, she wasn't careless, she didn't make mistakes that could be easily pointed out or corrected. But she watched Maya with a precision that suggested she was waiting, not for failure exactly, but for proof. Proof that Victor had made the wrong call. Proof that this disruption, this outsider brought into a tightly controlled environment, would eventually create consequences that couldn't be ignored. And for a while, Maya gave her nothing, until the email. It came late in the afternoon, just as the day was beginning to wind down. The kind of message that would have gone unnoticed under normal circumstances, forwarded through internal channels, flagged by a system alert before anyone had time to react. But the moment Claire stepped into Maya's office, without knocking, tablet in hand, expression tighter than usual, Maya knew something had shifted again, and not in her favor. "We have a problem," Claire said, her voice low, controlled, but carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. Maya looked up from her desk, her brow furrowing slightly. "Define problem." Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she set the tablet down in front of her, the screen already open, and Maya felt it before she even read it. That quiet tightening in her chest, the instinct that told her this wasn't going to be simple, wasn't going to be clean. The subject line alone was enough to make her pulse spike. Confidential financial report, external distribution, and beneath it, a thread of forwarded messages, timestamps, attachments, and at the center of it all, her name. Maya stared at the screen, her mind racing, scanning, rejecting, trying to make sense of something that didn't fit, that couldn't fit, because she hadn't sent this, hadn't even had access to half the data in that report without clearance she knew she didn't have yet. "This isn't mine," she said, her voice steady, despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. "I know," Claire replied immediately, and that, more than anything else, made Maya look up, surprised. "You know?" Claire crossed her arms slightly, her expression still guarded. But there was something different now, something less accusatory, more analytical. "It's too obvious," she said. "Whoever did this wanted it traced back to you." Maya exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair, forcing herself to think, not react, because reacting would be exactly what they expected, whoever they were, and she had been in enough situations like this to understand how quickly things could spiral, how easily narratives could be built before facts had a chance to catch up. "Who's seen it?" she asked. "Victor," Claire said, And the board. Of course they had. Maya nodded once, pushing the tablet back toward Claire as she stood, her movements controlled even if her thoughts weren't. Then I guess we don't have much time. Claire studied her for a second, as if reassessing something she thought she already understood, then nodded. No, we don't. Victor's office felt colder than usual when Maya stepped inside, the air heavier, the space more confined despite its size, and he was already there, standing behind his desk, his hands resting lightly against the surface, his expression unreadable in a way that made it impossible to tell what he was thinking. And for a moment, just a moment, Maya felt it, the weight of doubt, not necessarily his, but the possibility of it, the knowledge that no matter how much she had proven in the past few weeks, this was the kind of situation that erased progress, that reduced people back to assumptions they had never fully escaped. "Tell me you didn't do this," he said, his voice low, controlled. Maya met his gaze directly, not hesitating, not softening. "I didn't." The silence that followed stretched longer than she expected, not because he didn't believe her, but because the stakes were too high for belief alone to be enough, and she could see it, the calculation behind his eyes, the need for certainty in a situation that had been designed to remove it. "I want to believe that," he said finally, "but this is serious, Maya." "I know exactly how serious it is," she replied, stepping closer to the desk, her hands resting against it, grounding herself. "Which is why I'm telling you, this isn't me, and whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing." Victor didn't interrupt, didn't challenge her, but he didn't immediately agree either, and that hesitation, however slight, told her everything she needed to know about the position she was in, not trusted completely, not condemned outright, but balanced in between. And in a room like this, in a company like this, that middle ground didn't last long. "The board is already preparing a response," he said. "They're considering suspension pending investigation." Maya let out a short breath, something sharp and humorless. "Of course they are." She straightened, pacing once across the room, her thoughts moving faster now, connecting patterns, possibilities, because this wasn't random, it wasn't a mistake, it was targeted, deliberate. And if she was the target, then there had to be a reason. "I was the easiest option," she said, more to herself than to him. "New hire, no established allies, not enough history to defend myself." Victor's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't argue. "And let me guess," she continued, turning back toward him, "whoever did this made sure the trail looks clean enough that by the time anyone questions it, the damage is already done." Another pause. "You're not wrong," he admitted. Maya nodded slowly, absorbing that, letting it settle, then exhaled, her shoulders squaring again as something else took its place, something steadier, sharper. "Then we don't wait," she said. Victor's gaze sharpened. "Explain." "We find who actually did it," she replied, her voice firm now, grounded. "Before they finish building the story they want everyone to believe." Claire stepped forward slightly from where she had been standing near the door, her attention shifting fully to Maya now, no longer observing from a distance, but engaging. "It won't be easy," she said. "The report was routed through an external server. Whoever did this knew how to cover their tracks." Maya met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Not trust exactly, not yet, but alignment, necessity. "Nobody's perfect," she said. "They slipped somewhere." Claire studied her for a second longer, then gave a small, decisive nod. "Then we find the slip." Victor watched the exchange, his expression unreadable, but his silence no longer neutral, something in it shifting, recalibrating, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a different weight, less distant, more deliberate. "We do this quietly," he said. "No assumptions, no leaks, and no mistakes." Maya nodded once, her pulse steadying now, her focus narrowing into something precise, controlled. "Agreed." Claire picked up her tablet again, already moving, already working through possibilities. "I'll start with the server logs, trace the routing points, see where it deviates." "I'll go through the report itself," Maya added. "Who had access? Who benefits from it being out there? Who loses if I stay?" Victor's gaze lingered on her for a moment, longer than before, and when he finally nodded, it wasn't just approval, it was something closer to decision. "Then we move now," he said. And just like that, the balance shifted again, not back to where it had been, not yet, but forward, into something more dangerous, more uncertain. Because whoever had set this in motion hadn't just made a mistake, they had made a move, and Maya Brooks had no intention of being the one who paid for it. The truth didn't come all at once. It rarely did. It revealed itself in fragments, in inconsistencies that didn't quite fit, in patterns that only became visible when someone refused to stop looking. And over the next 48 hours, Maya Brooks barely left her office, the glow of her screen reflecting in tired eyes that refused to close, her mind moving faster than her body could keep up with. While across the room, Claire worked with the same relentless focus, fingers moving across her tablet, pulling logs, tracing digital paths that twisted through layers of security designed to hide exactly the kind of breach they were trying to expose. And for the first time since they had met, there was no distance between them, no quiet tension lingering beneath their words, only a shared understanding that whatever this was, it was bigger than either of them alone. "He rewrote it twice," Claire said at one point, her voice cutting through the silence, sharp but controlled. "Internal server to external proxy, then back through a secondary account." He knew what he was doing. Maya didn't look up immediately, her eyes fixed on the report in front of her, scanning line by line, searching for something beyond the numbers, something human, something careless. Because no matter how clean the digital trail looked, people always left something behind, a decision, a pattern, a motive that couldn't be erased with code. "Who had access to both systems?" Maya asked, her voice quieter now, but no less focused. Claire tapped the screen, pulling up a list, narrowing it down, cross-referencing roles and clearance levels. "Senior executives only," she said. "People who've been here long enough to know how to move without being noticed." Maya nodded slowly, her mind already moving ahead, not just looking for who could do it, but who would benefit from it, who needed her gone. And as the list narrowed further, one name stayed longer than the others, not because it stood out at first glance, but because the more she looked at it, "Callaway," she said, finally looking up. Claire's expression shifted slightly, recognition flickering behind her composure. "Eric Callaway," she confirmed, "head of strategic operations." Maya leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly, the pieces locking into place one by one. "He's been pushing the outsourcing deal harder than anyone else." "And you've been the most vocal opposition," Claire added. Maya nodded, her jaw tightening slightly. "If I'm out, the deal moves forward, without resistance, no questions, no delays." Claire was already pulling more data, digging deeper into Callaway's activity logs, her movements faster now, more precise, and then she stopped, just for a second, her eyes narrowing at something on the screen. "There," she said, turning the tablet toward Maya. "Secondary account, linked through an old authorization chain. It's his. He just masked it well enough that nobody thought to look twice." Maya leaned forward, studying the data, the timestamps, the routing. the connections that tied everything together. And for a moment, just a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on her. Not because she doubted the truth, but because she knew what came next, what it would take to bring it forward, to stand in a room full of people who had already decided who she was and force them to see something different. "We need more than this," she said, her voice steady, despite the tension building in her chest. "This proves access, not intent." Claire nodded, already anticipating that. "Financials," she said. "If he's benefiting from the deal personally, we'll find it there." It didn't take long after that. Not once they knew where to look. The transfers hidden, but not invisible, offshore accounts, consulting fees that didn't align with company policy, all of it building into something undeniable, something that could be brushed aside as coincidence or misinterpretation. By the time the sun rose, they had everything they needed. Maya stood outside the boardroom doors, the folder in her hands heavier than it should have been, not because of the paper, but because of what it represented. The line she was about to cross, the moment where she either took control of the narrative or let it define her. And for a second, just a second, she closed her eyes, steadying herself, remembering the rain, the diner, the boy who had looked at her like she was the only safe place in a world that hadn't given him many. And when she opened them again, the hesitation was gone. She pushed the doors open without waiting to be called. The room fell silent almost immediately, conversations cutting off mid-sentence as every head turned toward her. The shift in attention sharp, immediate, and at the center of it all. The board sat in their usual formation, composed, controlled, already prepared to act. And at the head of the table, Victor Cole watched her with an expression that revealed nothing and everything at the same time. "Miss Brooks," one of the board members began, his tone measured but edged with authority. "We were about to—" "Make a mistake," Maya cut in, her voice calm but firm, carrying across the room without effort. That alone was enough to disrupt the rhythm they had established, enough to force them to pause, to reassess, and Maya didn't give them time to recover. She stepped forward, placing the folder on the table with deliberate precision. "I know what this looks like," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting each pair of eyes without hesitation. "New hire, limited access, easy to blame, easy to remove, clean solution, right?" No one answered, but the silence spoke loud enough. "Except it's not true," she said, sliding the documents across the table. "And if you take 5 minutes to actually look at what's in front of you, instead of what you expect to see, you'll realize that." The room shifted, tension building, as the papers were picked up, scanned, processed, expressions changing slowly but undeniably as the pieces came together. The emails, the server logs, the financial records, all of it pointing in one direction. Eric Calloway. He sat 2 seats down, his posture stiffening as the realization spread, his carefully maintained composure cracking just enough to be noticed. "This is absurd," he said sharply, his voice tighter than before. "You're deflecting, trying to cover your own tracks." Maya turned toward him, her expression steady, unshaken. "If I were covering my tracks," she said evenly, "I wouldn't walk into this room with evidence that ties everything back to you." A ripple moved through the board, quiet but unmistakable, and Calloway's jaw tightened as he glanced toward Victor, searching for support that didn't come. "Victor," he said, his tone shifting, more controlled now, "you can't seriously be entertaining this." Victor didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the documents in front of him, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, precise, and final. "She's not wrong. The words landed harder than anything else that had been said, cutting through the room with a clarity that left no space for argument. And Calloway's expression shifted fully then, the last traces of control slipping as the reality of the situation settled in. "This is a setup," he insisted, but there was no conviction behind it now, only desperation. Victor stood slowly, his presence filling the room in a way that silenced everything else. "Effective immediately," he said, his gaze never leaving Calloway. "You are relieved of your position, and legal will be reviewing this in full." Silence followed, heavy, absolute, the kind that marked the end of something and the beginning of something else entirely. Maya didn't smile, didn't react beyond a small exhale as the tension finally released from her shoulders, because this wasn't about victory, not in the way they might think. It was about truth, about control, about refusing to be reduced to something she wasn't. The meeting dissolved quickly after that, the board shifting from accusation to damage control, voices lower now, more cautious, and as the room emptied, Victor remained where he was, his gaze finding Maya again, something different in it this time, something that hadn't been there before. "You handled that well," he said. Maya let out a quiet breath, crossing her arms loosely. "I handled it because I had to." Victor nodded slightly, acknowledging that, not diminishing it, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them, no longer tense, but not entirely easy either. "I should have trusted you sooner," he said finally, the words measured, deliberate. Maya studied him, then shrugged lightly. "You trusted me enough to let me fight for it. That's more than most people get." It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was something close to understanding. And Victor seemed to recognize that, because he didn't push further, didn't try to turn it into something it wasn't. 2 weeks later, the air felt different again. Not just inside the building, but beyond it. The ripple effects of what had happened still moving through the company, reshaping conversations, forcing changes that had been delayed for too long. And on a clear afternoon, just outside a small community center on the south side, Maya stood beside a familiar figure, watching as a group of students gathered near the entrance, their laughter cutting through the noise of the city in a way that felt lighter, freer. Ethan sat beside her, his wheelchair positioned just at the edge of the crowd, a grin on his face as he adjusted the strap of his backpack. "Told you I'd be back here," he said, his voice brighter now, stronger than it had been that night in the rain. Maya smiled, reaching over to ruffle his hair gently. "I never doubted it." Victor stood a few steps away, his posture still composed, still controlled, but there was something softer in his expression now as he watched them, something less guarded, less distant, and when he stepped closer, his voice carried that same shift. "You've changed things," he said, looking at Maya. She shook her head slightly, glancing back at the building behind them, then at the kids gathering inside. "No," she said quietly, "I just reminded people what they were supposed to care about in the first place." Victor considered that, then nodded, accepting it without argument. Years later, the name on the office door read, Maya Brooks, Vice President of Strategic Development. But the title wasn't the point. It never had been. What mattered was what came with it. The policies that shifted, the programs that expanded, the partnerships that brought opportunity into places that had been overlooked for too long. And at the center of it all, the same principle remained. Simple but powerful. The idea that seeing someone, really seeing them, without expectation, without calculation, could change more than just a moment. It could change the direction of everything that followed. Because sometimes, the smallest act, a warm meal on a cold night, A choice to step outside when it would have been easier to stay inside didn't just matter in that moment. It echoed, it carried forward, and if you were paying attention, if you were willing to follow it through, it could become something bigger than you ever imagined.